Hi, it's Andrew Paul Cronin. Thank you for listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. Over the past couple of years, I've talked to artists, a poet, a doctor, my two moms, an orchestra conductor, a ghost hunter, a race car driver, a professional dancer, and many, many more. If you like these stories, if you like the guests, if you like the questions, if you like the show, please consider supporting it. Go to qaapc.com/donate. Thanks.
But I was always sort of curious about Cronin. I thought he was some sort of wizard. I thought he was older than he was. I thought a lot of things, and then he comes, he's like, he's just this guy. But he does the full spectrum. He lives down the street. So here's Cronin.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 34, Matthew Fine. My guest, Matthew Fine, is a businessman, sculptor, and the writer, producer, and director of the independent romantic comedy Art Show Bingo. Filmed entirely in southeastern Virginia, Art Show Bingo tells the story of Will Hunter, an aspiring painter who is torn between his art, his twin brother, and a promise he made to his father to one day take over the family business. Matthew Fine financed the film himself, which was released in 2017. Art Show Bingo is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. Matthew Fine has been making sculpture since 1983. His pieces incorporate hot cast glass and granite that he joins together and shapes into a finished piece. His art has been exhibited in galleries from Los Angeles to Chicago to New York City. This episode of the Q&A with A.P.C. was recorded at Matthew's home in Norfolk, Virginia. Matt Fine, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Matt, what was the first film you saw in the theater, or simply the first movie you remember that really stuck with you?
That's a good one. It's funny. I just the other day was on Facebook, and they were doing this all these old things from Virginia Beach, and there was a photograph of the Shore Drive-In, and it brought back a flood of memories of seeing movies there. Probably not the first movie I remember, but I remember watching Patton sitting on top of my mother's Vista Cruiser station wagon.
The George C. Scott picture.
Yes. Yeah. So that was quite some time ago, but yeah, a lot of funny memories from going there as a kid, and then into my teens before they tore it down.
What was the first piece of art or sculpture that resonated with you early on in life?
You know, my parents we did a lot of traveling, and they were really good about. You know, they'd let us play in the pool for a couple hours, or, you know, they would always find a kid adventure, but then they would always take us to, a piece of the art world as well, find some cultural event for us. And I remember being a kid and going to the Virginia Beach Boardwalk Art Show, and my dad buying a piece of sculpture that is still in our house to this day. And I remember just thinking it was so cool. It's a little totem of these faces kind of that wind around a central post. I just remember him being so excited about it and bringing it home. And
what was the material in the sculpture?
It was cast bronze, I believe.
Yeah. And how old were you then?
I was probably 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And it just and it's funny because obviously I think we're going to talk about Art Show Bingo, which is a movie that has a lot to do with the Virginia Beach Boardwalk Art Show and my experience there. That was definitely something I thought it was really cool that my parents went there, and I remember him buying the piece and the artist bringing it out to the house.
Sure. And being 7 or 8, you're old enough to sort of recognize what you like, but also young enough to sort of kind of go along for the ride, right? And not really have your own.
Yeah, I remember just being more excited by my dad's excitement than the piece itself. And he was, that's probably he was probably pretty young then, and it was he was excited about buying this piece.
You were born in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Can you give me one positive thing and one negative thing about growing up in a beach town?
Man, I really, really loved growing up in Virginia Beach. It was a sleepy little beach town then. I would guess, so my parents are still alive, still married, and still live in the house I was brought home from the hospital in 1963, which is probably a pretty rare thing, and that's because they live in a pretty cool house. They are on the Oceanfront in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And so, I just loved being a kid and feeling kind of, particularly in the winter, going out in the dunes, and there wasn't anyone else around, and it felt like it was my own little paradise.
Yeah, is there any? I lived at the Oceanfront on 85th Street for a spell for a couple years. The winters can be pretty isolating, and not necessarily in a wholly bad way, but it could be a little bleak.
Yeah, back then it's funny because only, like I said, maybe a third or a quarter of the houses on the oceanfront even were occupied year round back then. And compared to now, where it seems like every house now has another house in its side yard or backyard,
right.
and if not that, and then a duplex, and it's so busy down there. I never thought of the isolation as being a bad thing. I thought it was very beautiful that it was so quiet, and everyone loves the beach because it's such an incredible place to just be alone or to experience nature, and I just felt like I had. It really did feel like it was my own. We'd play kick the can. I had an older brother and older sister, and we'd play in the dunes. That was kind of our backyard.
What about surfing?
Surfing was my dad, kind of a funny little story, he and his brother started wave riding vehicles.
Really?
Yeah, in 1967, they couldn't buy. My dad wanted to buy a surfboard, and he couldn't find one, so he got together with Bob White and created WRV. And I remember as a kid them coming up with the incredible emblem of the wave of dolphins. They had these porpoises cut out, and they were at my dining room table with a friend of his who was an ad guy, and they were doing them facing each other and away from each other. And then finally, they started talking about waves, and the ad guy made the wave of porpoises right there at our dining room table as a kid. And so I was a little bit of a late bloomer surfing. I like boogie boards earlier on, but my brother surfed, and all his buddies surfed, and I think my first surfboard was for my bar mitzvah. I got a board.
Yeah, that's an amazing story.
We still have the number one. So the first surfboard ever created by WRV is in our collection.
It's at your parents' house.
My dad's house. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Matt, what are you going through in life right now?
I'm a little young to call it my victory lap, but this is really a very much of a celebratory part of my life. My wife and I raised 3 boys that are our twins are 25, and our youngest has just gone off to Savannah College of Art and Design. He's a freshman down there.
Congratulations.
And, I've done really well in business outside of the art world, and I'm kind of taking time to do projects and slow things down a little bit with my wife and I in terms of our relationship and spending time together. And, I used to feel like I need to be the first guy at work every day and, all that stuff. And, now sometimes I'm kind of a 9:30, 10 o'clock guy now. And it's because we spend time together in the morning talking and drinking coffee and just being together. And it's really, I think Art Show Bingo, is as much as it was a very intense thing, was also part of this, like, just following a dream that you never had time for, or couldn't afford, or and just making my sculpture like I do it. I do it for all the right reasons, I believe, and because I love it and I want to do it, and not to meet the market or any of that. And so I feel like I'm lucky enough to kind of realize I'm in a pretty special place where I can explore things because I want to, and I'm a very lucky and blessed individual.
Has that rolling into the day at 9 o'clock in the morning been easier than you thought it would be, or is it do you feel a little pull there still?
Well, it took a little while to get used to, but now I just, I feel like when I get there, I'm so much more centered and calm and more productive. And, I'm kind of one of these guys who's kind of working 20 hours a day anyway. Even when I'm not there, I'm always busy with stuff. So it's not like I'm missing out on anything. And it just, my relationship with my wife is probably the most, important relationship in my life. And, we enjoy talking, and that's what we do.
Matt, real estate developer, writer, storage unit business owner, sculptor, filmmaker, volunteer. Many of these things don't seem to connect to the others. Can you help connect them for me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing is I like doing stuff. For the longest time, when I looked at my boys, and I've got this little horn that goes off in the back of my head every 6 minutes, go dun dun dun, and got to go answer the horn, and a lot of times they're big ideas like building a storage facility or making a movie, or this art career has forever been kind of driven by the horn, just make more, show more. And it's been kind of fascinating for me to kind of look at my boys and realize that they're not just not listening to the horn, but a couple of them I don't think have one. And so, for me, that realization also helped me realize that I'm kind of lucky with who I am, that I have this device that keeps me driven and keeps me excited and keeps me wanting to stay really motivated in life. And so whatever I do, I'm kind of, I like doing it all the way.
Would your wife and your children say that you have a hard time relaxing? Or would you say that you have a hard time relaxing? I
definitely used to. I think part of what I'm saying about the staying home at home a little bit more in the mornings, I've started meditating, and I've just kind of I exercise every morning. I'm realizing that it's a fine line between being selfish and taking care of yourself, and I've kind of learned to take care of myself, and with that, it's allowed me to settle down a little bit. We used to go on vacation, and I would have to go run on the beach, and then go surfing, and then maybe play golf, and then go out and find ingredients, and then my wife and I would cook a great meal and kind of all that stuff. And I can actually sit on the beach now, which I think it's really just a testosterone finally at 50 something
leveling out here.
Leveling out a little bit.
Your brother, Jeffrey Fine, once said in an interview that having been raised in Virginia, your family had the very Southern way of putting a sunny face on everything. What is something growing up that you or your family felt should have a sunnier face than perhaps it deserved?
Wow, look at you. Put a sunnier face. Wow, that's a good one. I guess the one thing I think from my childhood like that is, I had some real academic challenges, and reading comprehension was extremely hard for me. And finally, when they needed me to learn Latin at the same time that I was learning Hebrew for my bar mitzvah and a couple other things that I just wasn't ever super successful at academically. I had to move. I went to Cape Henry for a year, and then I went off to a prep school, and I always felt like I needed to find a way to make that seem like it was a choice and not, kind of an unpleasant circumstance. Mm-hmm. But, it certainly wasn't, I wouldn't have chosen it. But, the beauty of that and the glass half full side of that is I don't think I would have ever found sculpture and being an artist if it hadn't been for those struggles academically. It led me I went to a Quaker prep school up in Pennsylvania, which I really loved. And the teachers there were super kind, and that's where I kind of rebuilt my self-esteem after kind of feeling a little beat up. And they were like, you know what, Matt? Go to the wood shop, play lacrosse. I shot just about every picture in the yearbook that one of those years, and they allowed me to be happy and feel successful doing that. And really, the wood shop was the first time I'd ever done anything with my hands. And that really kind of was the spark that led me to wanting to be a sculptor, I think.
You went to a Quaker boarding school in Pennsylvania for high school. The word boarding school conjures up images of cold brick buildings, bookshelves, uniforms, strict headmasters. What was your experience like at that boarding school? You mentioned it a little bit, but...
Yeah, well, the Quakers are not... they're kind of hippies. It's not the Quaker Oats guy. It's the kind of a very, all the teachers were first name basis. They lived in the dorms with us. They were kind, and all the classes were small. There was no dress code. We all had to, part of the Quaker philosophy is that everyone has to help with everything. You always had a job on campus to help, whether it was washing dishes or, working in the stables or...
It's right up your alley.
Yeah, they kept me busy.
You began making sculpture in 1983. How did you find your way to sculpture?
So I, again, was the somewhat frustrated academician, and I met this really nice girl in freshman English who that next year took a ceramics class. And millennials wouldn't know anything about this, but when we would want to register for classes, they had this giant. We would meet in the basketball court, and all the departments would set up tables. And so if you needed an English class, you'd go and you'd stand there, and they would have all the cards in a card catalog, index cards. Uh-huh. With if they had 20 spots in the class, there were 20 index cards. And when you got to the front of the line, so my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 28 years, said I should take a ceramics class with this guy, Demetrius Mavroudis, who was she just thought he was a very fantastic character. And so I got to the front of the line. I said, I'd like to take ceramics with Demetrius Mavroudis. And they looked, and there were no more cards left. And so you had to go get in the back of the line. I went, well, what else does he teach? Well, he teaches sculpture. So I grabbed one of those by chance. And that was the beginning of it. I went to the class. Day one, they gave us a pile of clay. And I went back like day 2 or 3, and I was like, Demetrius, this isn't for me. And he looked at me, and he pointed out back. He said, there's a rock out there. Here's a hammer and a chisel. And, that's part of that whole frustrated academia. And it felt just fantastic going out and beating a rock with a hammer and chisel. The thing that I remember most about those early days of sculpture was it was like one of the few things I didn't know enough about to know whether I was doing it right or wrong.
Sure.
So without the rules, I felt like I could kind of do anything, and I was very adventurous with my early pieces, and I loved it immediately.
Do you have archives, or do you actually have any of those early pieces?
I do.
I do. Yeah.
I have one in my office. I kept one of the earlier pieces. That summer, my family went to Italy, which was an incredible trip. And while we were there, we went to Carrara, which is where all the white marble comes from. And there was a sculptor there that they had met and bought a piece from. And I got to Carrara, and we were there for a day or two, and we were supposed to go somewhere else. And I looked at my parents and said, I'd like to stay. And so I called up the guy and asked him if he would let me mentor with him. And I ended up staying for 5 weeks, I think.
Wow.
And I said, I'll polish your pieces. I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah.
He's like, no. Here's a table. Here's a rock. Get to work. Out. And so that's where it really sunk in that this was something that I could really dig my teeth into. And
as a parent, I'm surprised that your parents said yes to that request, but they must have saw something in you or felt the enthusiasm, in your voice. That's a tough question to ask, and probably a more difficult question to have to reply to as a parent.
Hey, no, my parents have always loved the arts. They've been patrons and been super active, both of them, in making our town a more arts-friendly town. My mother was the head of what is now MoCA, but back then was the Virginia Beach Arts Center. My dad has been chairman of the board of the Chrysler Museum. So they loved the arts. I think they were really thrilled to have, like most parents kind of push their kids away from it. They could not have been more supportive. And it always seemed second nature that it was okay to do that at our house.
Yeah. You graduated from the University of Richmond in 1986, and you began displaying or exhibiting your art that same year. The first time was at the Boardwalk Art Show in Virginia Beach, Virginia. What do you remember about that day?
I have a couple funny things. I remember borrowing, I can't remember which of my parents' cars I borrowed, but I had to take like 5 or 6 trips back and forth because with pedestals and sculptures, and
Sure.
I didn't have a tent, and just enough to get it down there. And I finally got it set up, and the show starts at 10, and there I am. I'm standing back for the first time, kind of surveying my work and kind of going, okay, well, here I go. And a couple walks down past my work. They look like straight out of Pennsylvania. And he looks at his wife and goes, "Look, Margaret, that one looks like a urinal." And I thought to myself, there's not enough time to get this stuff off the boardwalk and go home with my tail between my legs. It's funny. I've always said you got to have thick skin to show your work out like that in public. And, that was like my first tried and true lesson.
Describe for listeners the kind of sculpture that you do.
So I cast glass, and I cast into sand. And the process of sand casting is making an impression in the sand and then kind of filling it up like a bundt cake. So basically it's like making an upside-down sandcastle. I don't do a ton of drawing ahead of time. I like just to get in there and make things happen, and not even exactly knowing, it's not a preconceived notion of where even the sculpture is going to be. It's in the moment with the sand, and I cast the glass, and then afterwards I have this like moment of discovery, because you stick it in a giant oven and it's in there for a couple of weeks before the glass is cooling slowly, which is called annealing. And then it's kind of, it's like Christmas Day, I guess, every day when you open the oven up, and it's like, well, what do I have? And that's really where it starts from there, what I'm going to figure out what I have and where to go. And, I hadn't thought about it, but that's actually a skill that really served me well when we were making the movie. And I don't want to jump ahead too far in the interview, but one of the things that really happens when you do the best you can when you're writing your script, obviously, and you labor over it. And then you show up, and it's like, and all of a sudden you've got these actors who are going to inhabit the characters, and you got to let them go and do their thing. And the shoot's a really short period of time. And then when you go to edit, you have to take everything you thought your movie was going to be and throw it away and start at day one. Like, here's what I have. Here's what these are the bones I'm going to make my movie out of. It's not the script. It's not what you thought the script was supposed to be. This is what you got. And a lot of times, I feel that way. That's what's going on with these glass pieces. Is I try to stay dumb when I'm making them, and then I try and play catch up from there.
I watched a video of you pouring glass, and you had huge gloves, eye protection, a few assistants, a huge ladle thing, propane tanks, torches, and an oven that when the door opened sounded like literally like the pits of hell. It seemed to me way more dangerous than fun. Does it seem dangerous to you? And do you think there is something that draws you to activities that are extreme in one way or another? Because making a movie is pretty extreme also.
I think of it's much more exciting than dangerous. I could put a chemical in the sand that would make the sand rigid, so it wouldn't move when I'm pouring into it. But instead, I just use a little bit of dampening, like a sandcastle. And that is a designed obsolescence. Like, I know the molds are going to fall apart. I know sand's going to get mixed in. And basically, I'm just creating the situation where I'm going to have to react to the mistake that I've kind of pre-programmed into what I'm doing. And, every time it's a thrill. And I'm not a thrill seeker. It does look dangerous, I guess, but I always say, okay, and there's the fire extinguisher, and I always have 3 or 4 laying around, and if I catch on fire, please put me out.
Right. Your studio is designed with stone on one side and glass on the other side, and then you begin a process where you take a block of stone and a block of glass, and you hold them up and place them together to see which makes the most sense together. Can you walk me through this?
Yeah, I think it's funny, because I think that ultimately that's turned into the thing I'm best at, which is just kind of looking at volumes. These things that I make are definitely volumetric. They're big and heavy, and glass is these big, heavy, thick chunks of glass, but it also lets light through. And then the stone, just the opposite. So really, it's just kind of figuring out which of these things goes together and why, and then sometimes playing let the pendulum swing the other way, and forcing myself into the other direction, and what does that lead me to? And it becomes a stream of consciousness kind of creation process.
What are the benefits and risks though to having your art sort of having that as the way that you create, because it seems so right? I mean,
Well, the benefits are every time I do a show, someone will walk up to me and say, "I've never seen anything like this," and it's like, well, yeah, I'm that guy. The risk is I still to this day break a bunch of stuff. Glass gets broken, sculptures get halfway through and break. It is a very imperfect science that I have, but I used to get really frustrated when I would break something, and now I literally just kind of smile and step back for a second, and I know that all of the kind of painfulness of breaking things is going to lead me somewhere now.
and something breaks because you go a little too deep with the chisel and the hammer, or with the saw, or because you finished it and it's just not structurally sound.
Yes,
All of
and I'm grinding and the blade catches and it throws it across the room, or it's a unique thrill. I mean, it really is. It's the reason people do thrill-seeking stuff. Jump out of planes and do all that junk is because it makes them feel alive, and this definitely makes me feel alive.
And a lot of your sculptures really work. Describe the feeling you have when something really clicks and you see it come together, or you see the path you need to take to get there and it begins to reveal itself.
One of the real themes I've discovered as in my 40s and now in my 50s is it really is about the experience of making stuff that is my thrill. The big joke when I have a bunch of work together at a show and someone's like, "What's your favorite piece?" And I always say, the piece that's on the table at home. It really is the thrill of making. And it allowed me for 30-something years of making my sculpture to realize that, and to realize that the activity is the precious moment. And I think that was something that I was really able to bring to making the movie in a way that, I wanted to finish, of course, when we were shooting it. And when we were editing, I wanted to make the best movie I could make. But I was more interested in the moment, who I was talking to, and the conversations, and it really became an experiential thing. And I think I don't think I would have learned that anywhere else except at my sculpture table.
Where are you right now in your evolution as a sculptor?
Well, it's been interesting. The movie is almost a 4 or 5 year hole in my life, and through the creation of my storage businesses, which I built and owned 5 storage facilities, through raising kids and then the movie and nonprofit stuff. I mean, I've never not made my work, but this is has been the largest pause in my. I mean, I've still been working, but it's been a pause that has given me that chance again to kind of reflect on what I do and what I want to do. I'm 54, and I hope I have a bunch of years of sculpture left in front of me, and I'm sure that I do. But it allowed me to kind of think about making work that's satisfying to me on a different level. I just want to make work. I want to show up and go, what am I doing today? The funny thing also, as a young man, I used to go in the studio and I'd have writer's block, or whatever you want to call it. And I don't have that at all anymore. I get to the studio and I'm excited, and it just flows out of me.
In 2010, your brother Jeff Fine wrote and directed the independent film Cherry, which was an official selection of the 2010 South by Southwest Film Festival, the 2010 Seattle International Film Festival, the Boston Film Festival, and others. You were one of the producers of the film. Talk about the film and your role in getting it made.
So Jeff and I, again, to kind of go back to our youth, we were the guys that would, just wear out the VCR watching, 2001: A Space Odyssey over and over and over again, or whatever it was. And we always talked about making a movie together. And he actually moved to LA and went to film school, and, not just film school, but like USC.
Went to USC, yeah, the film school.
And Jeff is one of the smartest guys I know. And he reached a point where he was ready, where he finished his script and he was ready to produce it, and kind of kept finding stumbling blocks. And I finally just looked at him and said, "Jeff, I don't know anything about making a movie, but if you want to say, Matt, let's make the movie, I promise you we'll make the movie." And he said, reluctantly, probably, he said, sure, let's do it. So we scouted around in Virginia a little bit, and my wife's family has a house in central western, kind of nowhere, Michigan. And I was up there one summer and was reading about this film incentive that they were getting, which was going to be the richest film incentive in the United States at the time. And I said, Jeff, let's shoot it up here. And he's like, well, it's supposed to be an Ivy League school, on the East Coast. He went to Brown. And nothing in Michigan's going to look like Brown. I said, I tell you what, you give me a couple of days. And I drove, Michigan's a big mitt. It looks like a mitt. And I drove the entire southern hemisphere of the state of Michigan and went to every small school there was, and big school, because I went to State and University of Michigan, and finally stumbled into Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Kalamazoo College is there. And Kalamazoo College has this big, open, beautiful green quad and these 100-year-old brick buildings. And I was like, I have found it. So I called up Jeff and said, I have found your Ivy League school. And we ended up shooting right there.
So you plan to raise the money and have a budget for the film Cherry of $1 million. And the story goes there was a producer that held up the script and said, you can't make this movie for that little money. But you were determined to bring your brother's vision and story to the screen, even if it meant tightening the purse strings on a few things. What are some of the things that needed tightening up, and what were those conversations like?
Well, it was funny because, we were going to spend a bunch of money making this movie, and we got a full third back from the state of Michigan. But, I wanted to spend every dime on the screen. That was kind of the mantra that I had. So that meant hotels for the crew seemed like a silly cost to me. So the other school that is in Kalamazoo is Western Michigan. And I went to tour Western, and we're driving around and looking for a dorm to shoot in. And they show us this 70s concrete box. And they're like, this dorm is fallow. We're not using it. You guys could shoot here. And I said, okay. And I tucked it in the back of my mind. I said, but we need something, brick and ivy. And we went and found another dorm. And I said, so what do you say fallow? What do you guys do with that thing? And they said, well, it's just there. And I said, so how would you feel about me putting my crew up there? And they said, that's not going to happen. And, 4 or 5 days later, they agreed. And then we put our production offices in there. And then I forget how much later, but not too much later, they gave every one of our crew had one of those zip cards you use to get into the cafeteria. So instead of paying, $8 for pizza, I was paying like $3.40 a meal with the
right.
So we, so I kind of, everywhere I could save a dime and push us in a direction that kind of allowed us to when I say put the money on the screen, it's like, lights and cameras and actors and that's where we wanted to spend the money.
And you and your brother were roommates in the dorms in Western Michigan University. What did you discover or rediscover about your relationship living together like that?
Well, first of all, my brother is a list maker. And sometimes his lists turn into piles of lists. And he's really good at what he does. And he's extremely passionate. And the biggest thing that I decided I could do once we actually started shooting the movie was to insulate him so that I knew that he had he didn't have to ask for anything. I kind of would think what he would need ahead of time, as simple as doing his laundry, to making sure he was eating because he would forget to eat sometimes or get so involved in something. And someone would have a problem that they wanted to talk to the director. It would go through me first a lot of times because I would be like, you know what, let's solve this. Let's leave him. He's talking with the actors. And so I really concentrated most on insulating him and letting him be the artist that he needed to be to create the movie.
Back in 2009, 2010, when you were making Cherry, your twin sons were getting ready to go to college the next year. And you were glad, you mentioned in an interview that you were glad that they got to watch this process of working with your brother to make the film, that they saw the stress on your marriages, they lived with you being gone for months at a time, but they also saw the risks you took and your brother took to follow through on your passion. They saw how you worked together and looked out for each other and the importance of having your brother's back.
Yeah, that's very important to me. I think all that really rings true to me still to this day, that I want them to feel like they can take risks. I want them to feel that having someone who really cares about you, the depth of the relationship my brother and I have, and now he's moved back here to Norfolk after being in LA for it seems like 30 years. I feel like we stepped right back to where we were. I mean, I think the most important thing in life are these relationships, and these are the things that make life real and make it important. And I definitely wanted to let my kids see that you make sacrifices for each other.
While you were making Cherry, you got to thinking about the stories inside you, and you began writing a script that would eventually turn into Art Show Bingo.
Yeah, I definitely got bit by the bug. Everyone always said, write what you know. And I always thought that the art world that I live in, everyone's been to an art fair, and I think always people just kind of wonder what's actually going on behind the scenes. And, I just thought it was a unique place to set a romantic comedy.
When you ran into difficulties with the script, you were hoping your brother, who had more experience writing screenplays, would be able to come in and provide the silver bullet, as you said at one time, but he never saw that as his role. You said that he wanted you to struggle through the script and find it yourself, which you did, but it took years in the making of the film and of writing the script. It took you 4 years to write the script. Did you feel like he was abandoning you, or did you feel that this was his way of supporting you in your project, to go back to the brother supporting each other?
Gosh, I do remember he did. He made me struggle through it, and he was helpful, and we sat at this very table right here and spent many hours going over the script. The other thing is we finally reached a point where he wanted the script to be further developed, and after 4 years, I could feel the horn was starting to actually kind of start to quell a little, and it got to the point where I said, Jeff, I'm going to hire the casting director, and I'm moving forward with production, and he said the script's not ready, and I said, if I don't make it now, I'm not going to make it, and I just realized, it's a summer movie. We can't shoot it in October and fake the sun, and if I don't do it now, it'll be next summer. And I just didn't think I had it in me to spend another winter rewriting. So I said, Jeff, I got to do it.
The production budget for Art Show Bingo, you said, had to be under $250,000 because just one extra dollar would cost $100,000 because the Screen Actors Guild rates increased significantly above the ultra low budget threshold. Can you explain that it's $250,000?
Yeah, sure. It's easy. If you spend less than $250, I think we paid our actors less than we were paying much of our crew. It was like $130 a day. If it's over $250, you're paying them $250 a day. And when you did the math, it was, and then there's all this other benefits and stuff. So it was going to be exponentially more expensive if we broke 250. So we actually, even while shooting, obviously, things come up and you got contingencies and blah, blah, blah. But we ended up, having to cut a day of production just to keep it under. But it was, and I also, it was something that was really important to me that I self-funded this thing and I really needed to keep it in a reasonable place.
$250,000 is a very large sum of money to spend on something so uncertain on so many different levels.
Absolutely.
I mean, did you have pause at all? I mean, because that's just that's a large sum of money.
So I'd been at the storage business at that point for 20 years, and I refinanced a couple of properties. It was a big payday for me, and I earmarked some money to do this. My wife and I sat down and had been talking about it for a long time, and she said, this is something you want to do, and you've earned this, and we can risk this. And there's no way you can explain to someone else doing something like this, especially people who don't have that kind of capital to invest. And so it's humbling to say that I had that and could risk it, but I did, and I had a dream, and I wanted to see it through so badly that I made the choice.
What's the first thing you felt you had to do on day one on the set of your film?
So day one was pretty funny. So it basically, as my brother said, the first 3 days were film school for me. And he was there.
He was on set.
He was on set and really helped me direct early on. We were kind of co-directing, and he would make me do, say action and stuff, because he wanted me to kind of win the crew, let the crew know who was in charge. But it really was film school, and I had to learn how to move forward with what we were doing. And I watched a lot, and then, about halfway through the first week, as we got close to the time when he was going to leave, one night I went and sat with him. And you know how the NFL coaches have those big sheets with all the plays on them, and some are in green and some are in yellow.
Yeah,
and,
the laminated piece of
the
paper.
big So I had Jeff and I created my big laminated piece of paper that said, this actor responds to this actor's strengths and weaknesses are that, but don't say this to him or don't say that to her because blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And so literally we would be shooting and things would be going on, and I'd look over and go, oh, I need to go talk to Robert about something. And I'd pull out I'd look around, no one was looking. I'd pull out my little sheet and look at my laminated card and go, okay, okay, right, thanks, Jeff. And then I'd go talk to the actor. So,
as a sculptor, you make your work alone. So what was it like learning to listen and take advice? It seems like you were open to that and knew that going in.
Yeah, no, that was actually kind of the thing I was most looking forward to is sculpture is a very solitary act for me. I've always said that making sculpture, being an artist is problem solving. You just make your own problems, and being a filmmaker, there's a lot of problems there already. You don't have to make them.
What did you think directing a movie would be like before you started, and now that you have, how is it different than you thought it would be?
It kind of is surreal, actually, to be honest. So I spent 4 years writing this script, and then we shot 17 days over a 3-week period, and then we spent 15 months in a dark room editing. So when you say directing, the actual directing part, the interaction with the actors was so brief compared to the scope of the project that it just seems kind of more like a dream than something I can put my finger on. When it was all said and done, I said to my brother, as a director, I make a pretty good producer. And kind of the joke is that, I really did more. I mean, I did direct the film, but feels like I spent 17 days directing it and 5 years producing it. Being a producer is an amazing piece of when they give the Academy Award out for Best Picture, they don't give it to the director or the actor. They give it to the producer. And there's a reason why. He is the keeper of the dream and the vision. And, in this instance, I also created the dream and the vision as writer. It is you're the only, I was, with this movie, I was the first guy in and the last guy out.
Matt, so one of the things that I wrote down as I was researching you and going over your work, something that I thought of was, do you feel that you are especially or particularly interested in creating things that are permanent and long-lasting? Because your sculptures are very permanent, and this film is very permanent.
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately, yes. I mean, I like things of substance, I guess. One of the things that kind of reminds me of is, so when I was a kid, my dad had a best friend named Larry Mednick. And Larry was a structural engineer who owned a steel company here in town. He was also a concert violinist, and he was also a steel sculptor. His biggest thing was he was a very passionate man who loved life. And I always wanted to be kind of like Larry. I saw how much my dad admired him, and I just thought, what a life this guy lives. And so I always wanted to kind of never be satisfied with just one thing. And I like doing stuff, and I like doing things that to me, feel important. And I don't know about permanence, but just, things that challenge me on literally the highest level. I think it's all about, again, back to experience and creating a rich life and, the relationships you get to form while you're doing all these cool things.
In talking about life, what's the best advice you've ever received?
When I was getting my master's degree at the University of Georgia, I had a professor who said to me, never relax your gaze. And, that's been something I've found really important, is to always be an active looker and viewer of the world. There's so much to see. Never relaxing your gaze is just kind of a metaphor for, not only is there beauty around you, but there's this opportunity to always be a better viewer and more engaged in your world.
Matt Fine, thank you so much for coming on the show. It means a lot to me.
This has been fun. Thanks.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, visit QAAPC.com. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley. The music was arranged by Soup.